Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to The Tom Woods Show.
Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. Welcome to Tom Woods Show, episode 2582. And let me tell you something here. It seems weird to say to my guest, welcome back, like he was just here last week. The last time I talked to Robb Wolf was all the way back on episode 29. So it has been quite a long time, Mr. Robb Wolf. A lot of things have happened in the world since then. I mean, it was
one or two things for sure.
One or two things,
yeah.
Right. Politically, things have happened. Health-wise, things have happened. The COVID thing happened. It is absolutely wild, all the changes. But one thing that has not changed, now this is kind of a ham-handed segue, but is Robb Wolf himself in terms of his message. So if you go to Robb's website, you find he's a former research biochemist, New York Times, Wall Street Journal bestselling author. His books include The Paleo Solution and Wired to Eat, but also as co-author, the book Sacred Cow, which involves why well-raised meat is good for us and good for the planet. And I want to talk to Robb about something he wrote on Twitter/X not too long ago. And I saw it. I think we follow each other there. And I thought, doggone it has been quite a long time. And he still has very interesting things to say. So I guess welcome back, Robb.
I'm honored to be here, and I'm glad my first appearance didn't destroy your show and your career. Let's hope the second one doesn't put a nail in that coffin too. So thank you.
You know, it's sometimes I wonder, sometimes when I'm posing for pictures with people, I'll say, I'm not sure whose career is more damaged by this picture, yours or mine. But anyway, let's jump in. So you were talking, the context of this was, obviously a lot of people are talking about a lot of topics that haven't been as mainstream as maybe they ought to have been for a lot of years. And that's thanks to the increasing rise to prominence of RFK Jr. Because of his independent political run and now his nomination to HHS. And we are, I'd like to say we're all familiar with what he's saying, but I'm not quite sure that's true. I think a lot of people think of what he's saying only in the caricature they've seen in the New York Times and stuff like that. But I think you are a fair-minded listener of what he's saying. And I think your standpoint is more or less to say that he does have valuable things to say, and that there are a lot of things that everybody thinks they know about food, nutrition, health that just aren't so, but that your message is not entirely his message, and you have some tweaks that you would make to it. So I want to read what you wrote here. You say, I really like RFK Jr. and have high hopes, but it's critical to tackle these problems effectively. And so you give some specific examples. So can first of all, before we go into those specifics, did I characterize where you're coming from accurately?
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan of RFK. I never thought that I would see in my lifetime someone of significant political influence that would characterize our health situation all the way from the soil on up to the collusion between pharma and, say, like the FDA. I didn't think I would live to see it. So I think that he has such a grasp of the problems that we face, but and you stage this up great, but I also have some concerns that he may be going after some minutia that it may not be the primary issues that we need to tackle. And we have limited time, limited resources. And my only concern is that, whether you're trying to cut a diamond and turn it from a rough rock into a gemstone, or, do precision blasting to make a tunnel through a mountain, you got to do it exactly right. Like I don't want to make it overly dramatic and say we've got one chance at this, but we kind of have one chance at this. Like, he's a brilliant, charismatic guy. Because we're on the heels of COVID, people are questioning our health authorities in a way that they've never done before, and that is great. But I think that there are also some folks that are kind of majoring in the minors on a lot of these topics, and I think you're probably going to allude to some of that as you read the rest of my thoughts in that X post.
Well, let's start with one, because obviously we all know on some level that it's not a great thing to drink Coke. I know that. I know that. Every once in a blue moon, it just hits right though. I'm just so sorry.
Right.
It's just the thing that goes with that kind of food, but what a lot of people will say is, well, I want to get the quote unquote Mexican Coke that's imported from Mexico because it has real sugar in it, as opposed to high fructose corn syrup. And some people will, first of all, they say that the taste is a bit better, it's crisper, but other people will go and say, well, it's actually, and it's marginally better for you. But maybe, so you say the delta between high fructose corn syrup and table sugar is actually small. So maybe small enough that even discussing this is a misplaced use of our time. Is that more or less your perspective?
I think so. And the thing that does come to bear there is when we consume fructose in a liquid form, and it's important to point out that sucrose, table sugar, which is what is used in other countries, although I have to say, if you go to Italy, they use dextrose, which is really, really smart if you're going to use a straight up sugar to sweeten things, because the kinetics, when liquid fructose hits our liver, it does some really crazy things with regards to a feed-forward mechanism of creating metabolic dis-ease. And it kind of creates a feed-forward mechanism where not only does it start creating liver pathology in and of itself, it kind of primes the liver to be almost like ready to auger in and create even larger problems. And sucrose is half glucose, half fructose. You do have to enzymatically split that in the gut before it makes its way into the system. High fructose corn syrup is about 50-50 glucose, fructose. It is already split, and so it does reach the system faster. There are some kinetic issues. Just the speed of how quickly it makes it into our system is an issue. But I will also point out that for the most part, those Mexican Cokes are about 1/3 the size of most of the U.S. Cokes. And like the dose really does have a big factor in that. So I do think that this is one of these things where quibbling over high fructose corn syrup versus regular sugar, and we're not really thinking about the size of the things that we're consuming, is maybe getting off in the weeds and will not ultimately end up solving the problems that we hope to solve.
Well, I know that what I'm stating here is just a commonplace, but having just returned from a trip to Argentina several weeks ago, I can say that if I observed with my own eyes that if you go to a place like a McDonald's or a similar place in Argentina and you order a drink, it's what we would consider the child size. Right. Is what people get. So it really is true that you come to the U.S. and you say, I cannot believe I could jump off a diving board into this thing. But that's also true of a lot of other things. I remember we used to entertain a lot of Europeans at our house. We lived in Auburn. We were near the Mises Institute. There'd be European students every summer. And, this was back before, I was not the best eater in the old days, Rob. And we had this like industrial sized tub of cheese balls. And it was this big. It was this big. And I remember this young Frenchman looking at that saying, we would never have something like this in France. I have never in my life seen anything like this. So you can't you can't neglect the issue of the size of the portion.
Right. You really can't. And I'm not entirely sure how to walk that back. We've had 50 years of just supersizing our plate sizes, not to derail us, but a lot of that is an outgrowth of subsidies that were enacted in the 1970s. Richard Nixon, on the tail end of his tenure, really needed a boost from a conservative base, and he reenacted subsidies that had been sunset after World War II. And so he garnered a bunch of support out of the more conservative farming base. And there's a pretty well-documented studies and good support for the notion that the farm subsidies led into the ubiquitous production of these cheap foodstuffs that then we needed to figure out something to do with it. And that led into basically the explosion of our junk food industry and the kind of supersizing of our food, because we all pay for this stuff. But when you go to buy your McDonald's meal or your bag of Doritos or whatnot, you do ultimately pay for that via taxes and healthcare and all kinds of other things. But the sticker on the package doesn't reflect the real cost there because of the subsidies.
Right, indeed. And so it would be interesting to see what would things look like if we just got rid of those, like without openly, without, let's say, promoting a positive program of everybody has to eat X and Y. What would happen if we just got rid of the artificial encouragement to eating other things? It would be an interesting experiment that I would like to conduct, as a matter of fact.
We would look a lot like a lot of other countries.
That
Australia,
would be nice,
New Zealand, because a lot of other places, because they're not the global reserve currency, because they can't just print money on demand. And so this ties into a bunch of our kind of economic and financial situations. But you do see examples of like developed countries that have access to, say, like an industrial food system, but that hasn't happened in the way that it's happened here because of the lack of subsidies in a lot of those areas.
Hey folks, do you really control your retirement money? If you've got a 401k or IRA or similar retirement plan, the government controls it. They decide how much you can borrow, when you have to pay it back, and you'll owe taxes and penalties for taking money out too soon or waiting too long, even though it's your money. And given that American politics is growing weirder and more psychotic all the time, who knows how much you'll have to pay in taxes during a retirement that could last 30 years? Well, Bank on Yourself is the proven retirement plan alternative that lets you bypass Wall Street, beat the banks at their own game, and take control of your financial future. You'll have guaranteed predictable growth and retirement income with no luck, skill, or guesswork required. Your plan doesn't go backward when the markets tumble. Both your principal and growth are locked in. You're in control. You get access to your money for any purpose with no questions asked and no government penalties or restrictions on how much income you can take or when you can take it. You can't do that with a 401k or IRA. And perhaps the best reason of all, you'll know the minimum guaranteed value of your retirement savings on the day you plan to tap into them and at every point along the way. You can get a free report with all the details on how the Bank on Yourself strategy adds guarantees, predictability, and control to your financial plan. Just go to bankonyourself.com/woods. That's bankonyourself.com/woods. Now, what about when we look at the ingredient label of some food? Toward the end of the list of ingredients, we see quote unquote natural flavors. Now, you were saying in your post that quote unquote natural flavors, which I admit I have no idea really what that's referring to, it should not be, especially if we've, as you say, we want to prioritize things to be concerned about. This shouldn't even be on the list.
Yeah, and this one gets me in a lot of trouble. So like
I'll give you time to explain yourself then.
Yeah, I guess I'm part of like the keto carnivore scene. Like that's definitely the way I eat to manage a lot of health concerns. But I do look at this with the perspective of being a biochemist, having done environmental toxicology over a number of years. And when we talk about flavors and flavor systems, usually when people mention natural flavors, there's this rote response that there are hidden boogeyman things in these natural flavors, that it's not absolute clarity in what's in there. And there is some truth to that. But when you dig in and you're looking for, okay, what are the negative ingredients in these natural flavors? Because we really either have natural flavors or we have artificial flavors. Like we have no supernatural flavors. We have no divine intervention creating flavors for us, at least that I've found. And so you really then have to take each one of these items as they come. And let's take like vanilla. So we could have natural vanilla flavor, which is usually either a water or an ethanol extraction of a vanilla bean, which usually has 40, 50 different compounds in it. And it's why if we were to think about tasting it and we imagine like a graph of all the flavors that we get, it's very rounded. It's got a lot of different flavor profile to it. But one of the primary flavors that we experience is this compound, this chemical compound called vanillin. We can also go by artificial vanilla flavor, which is only vanillin. And if you taste it, it's like, yeah, that's vanilla, but it's very hollow. It's like a singular pointed note, and that's it. If people are concerned about natural flavors, they are extracted from plants Sometimes they're produced via bacterial or fungal fermentation. So you have a bacteria or fungus the same way you would make kombucha or beer, and you extract some of the components out of that. But more often, what you're doing is literally like what we would do to make a cup of coffee or a tea. You're doing some sort of an extraction where you're running water or something like an ethanol solvent through the product, extracting characteristics of that item out, and then usually concentrating it. Sometimes it's freeze-dried, sometimes it's more just put into a concentrated form. But if you taste something that tastes like citrus, it probably came from citrus. If you taste something that tastes kind of like watermelon, it probably came from watermelon, although there is some variability there. So like watermelon and cucumber are very closely related botanically, and they have very similar compounds between the two of them. And so you might, if you had, let's say you made some sort of a naturally flavored soda pop that was watermelon flavored. The bulk of that probably comes from watermelon, but it's possible some of that flavor profile came from cucumbers because some of the chemicals have overlap in that. But when you really dig in deeply and you ask people, it's like, okay, what are the concerning feature around these natural flavors? They'll say, well, it's not obvious. It's not clear what's in it. It's okay. Do you want to talk about D-limonene? Do you want to talk about like the actual like International Union of Pure and Applied Chemists, technical name for this stuff? Or what are we discussing here? So I feel like the natural flavors topic has become this really boogeyman area. And even on the artificial flavor side, there's a bunch of things that are artificial flavors. They're synthesized in a lab, but they are chemically indistinguishable. Again, like the vanillin or D-limonene, which is found in both citrus and is found in pine trees under some circumstances. You can't tell the difference between these, whether they were naturally extracted or whether they were chemically synthesized. And it's again something that I think that people miss the kind of bigger picture. Could natural flavors play a role in people overeating? Sure. But it's because there's this really complex, really sophisticated food production process that really understands the neuroregulation of appetite, evolutionary psychology, evolutionary biology at a very sophisticated level. And they get very good at feeding us flavors that bypass the neuroregulation of appetite. That makes us want to continue to eat more stuff. But it's not just inherently like natural flavors bad. Like it's part of the whole scope of our food system. But if you like drinking a soda, like there are these soda Zevias that my kids like, they're naturally flavored. If you don't want natural flavors, then you're going to do artificial flavors. Or we get to drink water and tea and coffee and milk, and that's it. Like, so I oftentimes get a little bit stumped. It's kind of like, okay, you have someone has real concerns about natural flavors. Well, what else do you want to do? Or do we just not have any type of like flavored anything in the world?
Well, I think sometimes when it comes to beverages, that is the impression that I get from some people on what I would call like my side of the way we look at the world. That you're gonna drink your water, you're gonna be happy. And so, which I do. Which, by the way, so I drink water. I drink a lot of unsweet tea, and I drink hint water, which has the essence of like raspberry or the essence of blackberry or something, and it's. And that more or less, for the most part, does satisfy my desire for flavor. And it's such a, I don't understand how it works. It's so fleeting. Like I know that flavor was there and then it's gone just like that. And it's not fruit juice. It's I don't understand it. I mean, I suppose it's more or less what you just said. It probably is like a quote unquote natural flavor ultimately.
Yeah. And sometimes it is just a juice, maybe a juice concentrate. Sometimes they extract everything out of the peel, the fruit, the whole thing, concentrate it down, and it just takes a tiny little amount of that added to a beverage, like a hint water, that you would get that like essence of raspberry, essence of citrus, or something like that. Would folks be better served to avoid really powerful flavored foods? Possibly. Like I know some people that have had significant weight concerns throughout their lives. These powerfully flavored items can kick them out. It's almost like an addict. Like they get a really powerful flavored item, and it just makes them want more of different things. So I do think that there are use cases where limiting the palate exposure and really, really cutting things down as much as possible is really valuable. But I think that's also maybe not a fringe case because there's so many people that do have health concerns now. But I'm not entirely sure how to go after that, other than encouraging people, try to eat minimally processed whole foods and try to make that the backbone of what you're doing. But also, this is a great example. Like somebody's been drinking sugar sweetened soda. Are they in a winning scenario if they drink something like a Zevia that is naturally flavored and has stevia as a sweetener? I would say that would be a huge win. But then there are people that will say, well, stevia is too sweet and it will stimulate, insulin release, which isn't really, but it becomes this like kind of infinite thing. And it gets, again, I guess if you are, let's say, like a health influencer and you're trying to help people and you put out a message, it's like, I recommend that the lane lines are here. Great. But at the same time, you got to understand that not everybody is at that spot. And these kind of arbitrary lane lines don't necessarily empower or apply to everybody under all circumstances. But it's presented as if like, natural flavors are the absolute devil and all will be made right if we just avoid those. And I just don't know that that's the case.
Well, of course, the question that I'm leading up to but have not yet reached is if you were in a position where at the very least you had the attention of the country. I mean, let's leave aside whether you're going to impose a regulation or not, but you have the attention of the country and you can draw their attention to things that should be of concern to them. I would want to know what a Robb Wolf would say to America. But since I want to get you in a little bit more trouble before we get to that, let's get your opinion on so-called seed oils.
Yeah, and this is the one that I just make people in my community crazy. I don't think they're health food, but I also don't know that they are absolutely the monster that they are uniformly made out to be. People will put up graphs of, in the 1970s, seed oil consumption was low and obesity was low. And, as seed oils have entered the food system, we've gotten more and more overweight. And there is an interesting correlation there. But one of the struggles that I have here is that people will uniformly ascribe these problems to seed oils, period, full stop. And they don't really appreciate the fact that these seed oils are part of these hyper palatable, highly processed foods that have been engineered at a really remarkably sophisticated level to bypass the neuroregulation of appetite. So, I think about like the Costco chocolate muffin. These things are huge. They're delicious. You can smell them when you go into Costco when they're cooking them. And they're loaded with seed oils. They're loaded with sugar. They're loaded with calories. I think each one is like 1,400 calories. And one of my problems and also my concerns here is that people will ascribe the full negative metabolic impact of eating one of these muffins to the seed oils when they're not recognizing that just in general, there was just a really great study that looked at folks that were given access to what we would call ultra-processed foods. And the people at the low end of overconsumption were on average overconsuming by about 500 calories a day. The average overconsumption of food was 1,000 calories a day when we're in this ultra-processed food environment. And I really think that the bulk of the issue that arises here is that people are just overeating. And I know within like keto, carnivore space, people get really wrapped around the axle of insulin and suppressing insulin and all that type of stuff. I think it's really important from an appetite control perspective to eat in a way that our blood sugars are stable and we don't have a peak and a crash and whatnot. But a lot of people in the kind of health community are saying the whole problem there are the seed oils. when they're kind of neglecting that people are grossly overeating calories, writ large. And my big concern, and we could dig into maybe like the individual concerns around seed oils and then try to unpack some of that stuff. But my concern here is that we have somebody like RFK that is charismatic, is smart, has influence. It's the right place, the right time. And we shift our food production system away from seed oils. And instead of high oleic safflower oil being used to make Doritos, it's tallow or butter or something. I don't know that that's going to solve the problem of these things being hyper palatable and you open a bag and you can't stop eating the whole bag. That is my alpha and omega concern around this whole thing, is that we have an opportunity to really address the whole problem, which is again, kind of the subsidies that go into making these foods inexpensive, the engineering that makes these foods incredibly addictive. And if we think that the only problem that we face here is the presence of seed oils, then I think we're going to miss a huge opportunity to actually address the whole picture instead of focusing on just a piece of the problem.
Folks, you don't need me to tell you just how maddening American healthcare and health insurance can be. You look at American health insurance and it's an absolute mess. It's no secret. And yet, it's not getting any better. It's expensive. It's frustrating. Well, finally, there's something you can do about it. Because this whole mess is why Crowd Health was created. It's not health insurance. It's a better way to pay for healthcare through crowdfunding. Crowd Health is doing things differently. For $175 for an individual or $575 for a family of 4 or more, you'll get access to a community of people who are willing to help out in the event of an emergency. You'll get access to telemedicine visits, discounted prescriptions, and so much more. And you don't have to worry about doctors' networks either. Let Crowd Health help with your healthcare needs. Get started today for just $99 per month for your first 3 months. Go to joincrowdhealth.com and use code WOODS. Crowd Health is not insurance. Learn more at joincrowdhealth.com. That's joincrowdhealth.com, and remember code WOODS. All right, and that seems like a reasonable enough take on it. I will say, and this couldn't possibly be more anecdotal, but we, within the past few weeks, went to a Mexican restaurant. As a matter of fact, I think it must have been at least a month ago in Las Vegas, where the billboard advertising and how we found out about it boasts that it's seed oil free. But we got there was nothing on the menu about it being seed oil free. So we asked them, is this the same place? Oh, yeah. So I actually was wondering, this is a little bit of a side point about marketing, but I thought to myself, maybe they don't want the average patron who walks in there expecting a typical Mexican meal to think that they're somehow weird. So they don't go out of their way to point it out in the restaurant, but they're grabbing people who do care about that before they get into the restaurant by putting, anyway, that was my theory. But so even the chips they brought us were like, they prepared them in tallow, I guess. And what I found though, and again, this could just be my impression from having them only a few times, is that they were much more filling. Like I didn't want as many chips. So it had this built-in effect of making me not eat a whole basket of chips.
Well, and this may be where I'm barking up the wrong tree. Maybe there is this inherent satiety mechanism. You remove the seed oils.
I don't know. Again, it could just be me. That. It could just be. It could even be the power of suggestion. That, oh my goodness, I'm eating these chips that are prepared correctly. And then it must be having this effect, and then it does. Right.
Well, I would love to be wrong on this. I would love to be proven 100% wrong, and people go back through my Twitterverse and they're like, do you remember when Robb Wolf said that these were not issues? And because if it is that simple solution, then we really have an actionable plan to addressing it. I'm just I'm nervous that that's not the whole take on this, but maybe I'm wrong. It's possible.
Well, I appreciate your humility, but I hear the argument you're making. It seems reasonable enough. So now let's get to that question that we've been building to. So now you're the one, let's say maybe you are the head of HHS, or you have, at the very least, you have the attention of the American people. What would you tell them that pertains particularly to food and nutrition?
Man, I I do think that this needs to change from the floor up, like literally grassroots. And I don't know that I would tell people that much. I would really look to try to modify the farm subsidy program that we have. You do need some sort of a safety net for farmers because they operate in such a highly leveraged kind of commodities industry that like one bad year could wipe out these big players. But that's a whole interesting piece there too, is that as we've subsidized the production of food, producers get bigger and bigger and you have fewer and fewer players in the scene. What we see in other places around the world that don't operate this way is oftentimes some sort of a farm insurance, some sort of a production insurance, that you have to be careful the way the incentives are aligned with that so that people aren't getting paid to not plant a field of corn or wheat or whatever. So you have to be careful about getting kind of moral hazard and misaligned incentives. But what you find is that when we remove the subsidies, then the tendency to aggregate and bigger and bigger tends to go away, and you start having smaller operators. And so more people enter the scene. Each one of those people take on a slice of the risk of food production. And then that also tends to decrease the cost of what I would consider to be healthier foods, just minimally processed foods, meats, dairy, fruits, vegetables, those sorts of things. And then the things that go into the hyper-palatable, highly processed foods, like the grain products, like soy, like these seed oils. These seed oils are one of the primary beneficiaries of these subsidies. These things get comparatively more expensive. And I think it becomes both more challenging to make these foods at a really low economic point, because the subsidies have been hiding the real cost. So I don't know that I would really jump in and make a huge statement. We've had things like the food pyramid. Like I think when you and I were growing up, it was kind of more the food for food groups, and then the food pyramid. Then more recently, it's My Plate, and I forget there's kind of a new iteration even on that. In Brazil, maybe 10 years ago, they had a really reasonable position on the food intake that was emphasizing whole, minimally processed foods and really leading into the different traditional food cultures within Brazil, which there's a lot of them, depending on which region you're in. So I think that I would really back that up and get very non-granular about like macronutrient ratios and whatnot, but really emphasizing minimally processed whole foods. And then you actually follow through on it. Like our American Dietetics Association says, eat minimally processed foods, but then all their events are sponsored by like Kellogg's cornflakes and juice and stuff like that. So I think another piece would be to really decouple the funding that goes, food, pharma, and academia as it relates to nutrition recommendations. That would be another thing that I would do. But again, this is kind of more like policy, economics. I think that if you change the economics of the food system and make these hyper-palatable foods more expensive because they're not being subsidized, I think that there might be a tendency for people to just self-select in a different direction.
Now, I know that probably when we say highly processed foods, this is a case of you know them when you see them. But this is a term that's thrown around a lot. What does it actually mean for a food to be highly processed?
It's tough because I've seen folks throw out, like whey protein is technically highly processed. And it's like, okay, yeah, you got me. But it's also highly satiating. It has an anabolic response. Like people don't tend to overeat it. Usually what we're seeing with what we might call ultra processed foods is it is kind of unrecognizable from the stuff it started with. So like you take something like what is the Ruffles? It's not Ruffles, Pringles. So Pringles are these potato chips that are in a can, and they have this kind of saddle structure to them. They do have potato in them, but they have wheat in them also. They're actually made into like a paste, and then they're put into kind of a baking form that gives them that saddle shape. And there is nothing about them that would harken back to like wheat or potato, and so I think that that's kind of an example, maybe a shooting from the hip definition is that a minimally processed food is that you would recognize it as the item that it started with. An ultra processed food, you wouldn't know if it came from a lab or an animal or a plant or what have you, because it's been changed so much that you don't really know what it is or what went into it.
So we would consider Cheez-Its, for example, to be highly processed food. But what about a Swanson turkey dinner? I mean, it's still turkey, and those are real potatoes, right? That you heat up in the microwave.
Yeah, and this is where it gets. There's a lot of gray area on it. Yeah. So most cheeses, maybe it's minimally processed. Like you take milk, you put some rennet in it, you have some bacteria, it precipitates out.
Oh, I mean Cheez-Its, the snack crackers.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So like the cheese that comes out of a can, cheese that you can scoop. Yeah, those things
the crackers that come out of the cardboard box.
Right.
I'm sure they bear some resemblance to cheese at some level, but not really.
Yeah. I remember growing up, my parents got these things, Rewire. It's like this Scandinavian cracker. It's about yay big. It's like garbage can lid size. It's got a hole in the middle, and each one is, maybe a 1/4 inch thick. I don't know if you've had these things, but it's a rye cracker that's about the size of a dinner plate. And you break this thing up and you scoop up your food with it. I think they're delicious, but it's like rye and salt and yeast, and that's it. And interestingly, I find them delicious, but also to your point about the tallow-based corn chips, they're really hard to overeat. And I think even with like something like a Swanson, frozen dinner, turkey, some gravy, potatoes, a vegetable, is it like the best, most nutritious meal that anybody could have? Probably not. But I'm also not sure that people could eat 3 or 4 of those back to back. Like there is a satiety mechanism that gets met with that. Whereas like a bag of chips plus soda, the things like that really have a pretty slippery slope with regards to being able to overeat them. But you make a great point. There is not a beautiful delineation between what is like unprocessed food, like a steak, an apple. Like if I cut an apple into slices, it's minimally processed. Like I'm starting to process it. If I cook some applesauce at home, it's more processed. If I take a blender to it and really whip that applesauce up, it tends to both enhance the glycemic index and the palatability. Like people, the more we process things, tends to make it easier and easier to overeat it. So there is some side of a kind of a gradient on that. We see it even within traditional food culture. I remember my grandmother would make mashed potatoes, but she would whip them, but she didn't whip them a ton. There was still like a little bit of lumpy potato-y stuff in it because she kind of liked it. And if we poke around and look at the literature on that, if you spend a good 5 or 10 minutes really blending homemade mashed potatoes, the glycemic index gets much, much higher than just eating a plain white potato because we've broken it down. We've made it so that the digestive process is going to be much more rapid. We get a more pronounced blood sugar response, a more pronounced insulin response. That tends then to feed into a greater post-meal hunger. So we have a tendency to overeat after that.
I want to go on a little bit of a tangent here because I want to ask you, I became aware of, I guess, paleo around the time I got to know Mark Sisson and his Primal Blueprint, because I interviewed him back in like 2011 or 12 on the Peter Schiff show. And I started to follow that. Then I kind of fell off the wagon because, I love you guys. I know the differences between primal and paleo, but in general, I love you guys. But when you told me that after a while I would lose my appetite for pancakes and pasta, you were wrong. I never did.
Okay.
Still love them. So, all right, fair enough. But I've been better. I've been better lately. But the fascination with carnivore came only later. It came after that. After A lot of people had started talking about paleo. Then we started to hear about carnivore. I don't know exactly what year, but now that's become quite fashionable. So my question to you is, why are you paleo rather than carnivore?
I mean, I lean towards that carnivore approach mainly because I've had, so 25 years ago, I nearly died from ulcerative colitis. So an inflammatory bowel condition that just about killed me. I'm 170 pounds right now. I got down to 125 pounds when the low ebb of my ulcerative colitis. And although I'm kind of known as one of the early paleo people, I think my book was the first New York Times bestseller in the paleo genre. So it kind of set that genre up. But I've always done better on the lower carb side of things. So I've been closer to keto. I've tried to eat vegetables. And this is one of the funny things is that even for me, like I feel like I'm reasonably well steeped in this stuff, but like a big salad, a lot of vegetables, it would irritate my stomach. Like I would get some GI upset from it. And it was a number of years ago that I saw these kind of crazy people talking about like, well, when I finally cut out all fiber, then my digestion really got better. And it was really hearing the stories of Jordan Peterson and Michaela Peterson talking about like depression, in the case of Michaela Peterson, juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, that she got into remission doing this lion diet, like basically, meat, hot water, cold water, bubbly water. And that was, really about it. That was that, and salt, like that was the extent of her exposure. And, paleo was kind of defined by minimal or no grains, legumes, or dairy. And there was, again, not perfectly well-defined lines around that. That was kind of a difference between primal and paleos. Primal was pretty okay with different dairy products, particularly if they were, again, minimally processed and whatnot. But one of the, I think, benefits of paleo is it did have this perspective that there were certain foods like wheat, legumes in some circumstances, even things like tomatoes, which are generally regarded as a pretty healthful food for some people, particularly with inflammatory gut or autoimmune issues. These foods could be problematic. And so that was kind of the kernel of like paleo as a concept. I would say paleo was pretty macronutrient agnostic, or it should have been. Like some people do well on high carb, some people do well on lower carb. Usually adequate protein is really beneficial, whatever end you are on that. But paleo really kind of shone in that it was concerned about immunogenic foods that could cause gut or systemic inflammation at kind of an autoimmune level. And I think that what carnivore is that whole concept just taken another step forward. It's really kind of like the ultimate elimination diet. Like we are, and for many people, like there's different iterations of carnivore. Some people will do dairy, some people don't. Some people do eggs, some people don't. So there's different iterations of that. I think like that lion diet that Michaela had kind of recommended is maybe one of these like purest forms where you're only eating ruminant meat. It's pretty fresh so that there's no histamine production because of the aging of the meat and whatnot. And then if one was very sick, that would be a great place to start. And then hopefully you get healthier. And then hopefully one is able to reintroduce different foods. It's interesting with the Petersons, it doesn't really look like they've been able to add a significant amount of food variety and still maintain their health. So they, as far as I know, they still eat pretty tight to that like lion diet template. Whereas you have some other people like Sean Baker, who's just a absolute savage and a great athlete, has a fair amount of breadth in his carnivore diet. I think the main input is beef and lamb, but he will do some dairy, he will do some eggs, he will do some cheese and whatnot. So I don't know if that fully answered your question, but I am kind of known as one of the paleo proponents. I think it's an amazing template for my own health concerns. I've had to be more on the lower carb side of things. I do really well with the ketogenic diet, where I actually have active, measurable ketone levels. It tends to keep my autoimmune conditions in remission. I have a pretty gnarly essential tremor, which is a little bit like Parkinson's, where I'll get a lot of hand and neck shaking. And so long as I keep a fair level of ketones in my system, that essential tremor is basically a non-issue.
But so does that mean, though, that if you're eating a steak, you would, on principle, because it seems like a carnivore would, on principle, not pair that with a sweet potato and a salad?
But a carnivore would not. Maybe
Right.
somebody in the more paleo scene probably would, at least potentially, particularly if they're kind of metabolically healthy. Somebody like a CrossFitter or an MMA person, and a lot of people. So like high-end athletes, they oftentimes don't do great on a very low-carb diet. Some people do, some people don't. It really depends on the type of athletic activity that they do. But like a CrossFit or an MMA grappler that's a very anaerobic type activity, what they may find is that removing some things like wheat, potentially even dairy, or at least some types of dairy, may reduce systemic inflammation. Like they notice that some gut and some kind of inflammatory issues improve, but they would be fine, eating a steak and sweet potato, the salmon and a bunch of berries or parsnips or something like that. Yeah.
All right. Well, one other thing, this is kind of a personal question. Do you have kids?
I do. 10 and 12-year-old daughters. Yes.
Okay. So how do you navigate this kind of way of eating when your kids presumably aren't completely isolated? They go over to their friends' houses. They know what's being served in school. They see stuff on TV. The dad won't let them eat.
Well, I've never not told them they can't eat anything. So it is kind of one thing. We have a gluten-free house because I do have celiac. So like I just, that is one line that I made. I don't want to get poisoned in my own home. So if we have some bread or something like that at home or cookies, it's gluten-free stuff. I've just talked to my kids very early on. I've talked about my own health issues. I've talked about the fact that, we've built our whole career around helping other people with health concerns, and that there are kind of rankings of food. Some foods are a little more healthy. Some foods are less healthy. I talk to my kids about the reality that when they control their blood sugar, they tend to be wonderful human beings to be around. And if they go on kind of a carb bender, it's not surprising that they become insufferable to be around. Both kids, like if we eat out, neither of my kids seem to have the same celiac issue that I have, although it's very likely that they carry a celiac gene. But I didn't express the really severe gluten intolerance until I was in my mid-20s. So what I've recommended to my kids is at home, we mainly, we eat gluten-free. If we go out and there's a gluten-free like bun option, why don't you opt for that? If you're over at your friend's house and the only thing that they have is gluten pizza, don't sweat it. That's like one meal out of dozens that is not really a big deal. Both kids understand that if they're going to, let's say it's around Halloween and there's going to be a bunch of candy and pizza and stuff like that, if you could track down a little bit of protein, some chicken or a hamburger or even a hot dog or something, and kind of lead with that, then you're going to be less likely to overdo all the other carby stuff. And you'll be less likely to kind of auger into a hillside. And what's interesting about that is I have one daughter that is really, it's pretty easy for her to manage that stuff. And funny enough, I don't think she has that severe of blood sugar changes. And the other kid, if you, she's never met a carb she didn't like, and she'll hit a carb high. And then when she crashes, she's a monster. And she recognizes she's a monster, and she will make really poor decisions and kind of get in trouble as a consequence. But anybody in a blood sugar meltdown, like they're a crazy person. It's hard to I remember there was the Twinkie defense way back when somebody murdered someone. I think it was in San Francisco or something like that, and they were trying to get off because of a hypoglycemic event. It's not quite to that degree, but what I've tried to do is empower my kids to understand that there are just consequences to the food they eat. Protein, veggies, fruit tend to be really good, makes it easy to not overeat, gives us lots of energy. nice, stable, controlled energy. Some of these other foods are very easy to overeat. Like I big fans of the Satiety food brand, like the Wonderful Family. They made these seed oil free potato chips and tortillas and all this type of stuff. They're amazing, but they make this one flavor of potato chips. They're called Fuegos, and they're kind of like a barbecue potato chip, but they're pretty hot. Like if you eat a good couple of handfuls of them, your face is like tingling and hot. And whether it's me or my kids, like you would really have to work to not sit down and eat a whole bag of them because they're just amazing. They're delicious. So we just talked to them about that stuff. And I someday they're going to be off on their own. And I did not want to do the thing where, I sat on them and then they're like hiding candy bars in their bedroom and stuff like that. Like we just talked to them about consequences. And I've already told them, I'm like, hey, I'm not going to police your food. They're only 10 and 12, but I will make suggestions. It's like one kid we homeschool one kid goes to public school. The one kid that goes to public school does basketball, does gymnastics. And when we get a school basketball gymnastics day, I will say, hey, you need to fuel appropriately and garbage is not going to get you through the day. And she's had enough experiences of, I ate garbage food this day, and by the time she made it to gymnastics at 6 p.m., she's done. She's absolutely toast. And then she can't really train the way that she wants to, versus a day where really good breakfast, good choices at lunch, a good snack before, post-basketball before gymnastics, and she crushes it. And they're both smart kids, and we don't talk down to them. We just try to point these things out. And they seem to be navigating all that stuff fine. I think when they go out and live their own lives, they're going to have good understanding of the consequences of what it is that they eat. So there hopefully isn't like some sort of weird relationship with food, or like my dad was like restricting everything I ate and stuff like that. We make suggestions. We do have some guardrails around the home again around like gluten, because I don't want to get sick. But that's really about the extent of it.
I think that's what you just said is going to be very helpful for a lot of people who want to do the right thing, but they dread seeming like the mean old parents or the ones who aren't any fun. And why can't you be like, Joe's parents down the street and that kind of thing. It is just, again, from an early age, in a way that's age appropriate, explain what the consequences are, and that you've spent a lot of time thinking about this. And in your case, working on it, writing on it, speaking on it, making it your lifestyle. And I mean, in a way, it's like how I've dealt with a lot of other things in my family. I don't sit everybody down and say, today I'm going to lecture you on monetary policy,
Right.
But when they watch the news or they read an article online and they have questions, I answer them. And I answer them in a way that they find to be fair-minded. And I'm happy to answer any questions or objections they have. And so the result is a reasonably harmonious household where the kids are inclined to accept, what the adults say. Not just because we said it, but because we have a track record of being fair-minded, of treating them in a way that's age appropriate. And so, I guess that extends to food also.
Yeah. Well, and I think if people are open to it, the value of science is that it gives us a predictive process, and if you can a couple of times and do it in a way that's not beating them up, but they fuel well for a day and they do really well. They fuel poorly for a day and they do really poorly. It's like, which one of those days do you want more of?
Yeah.
And then you just put it back to them. And similar on the finances, live beyond your means. Don't diversify your risk portfolio and whatnot. And bad things happen, and it's very predictable. And then it's just kind of a matter of whether or not people are willing to embrace that.
Yeah, indeed. How do people follow you, Robb?
I don't know. I'm not online a whole lot. Like Twitter is kind of the main spot that I've been, or X. I do a little bit on Substack, but a couple of years ago, mainly as the kids have gotten older, I've really pulled back. My wife and I do a podcast in theory once a week, but it's more like 1 1/3 shows per month right now. Like we've been pretty busy. We have a small farm, and then we have the kids, and I have my other work stuff. The main place that I do anything is on X, and it's Robb Wolf, at Robb Wolf. That's probably the main spot if somebody wants to follow something. I do have a slew of Substack pieces that I've been chipping away at, and probably in the next year, I should have 8 or 10 pieces that go up in the first 6 months.
Robb Wolf is Robb with 2 B's.
Yep.
And that's how you can find you in various, particularly on, Twitter was how I got reconnected with you, because I saw that post and I thought, well, Robb Wolf's an interesting guy to talk to. Let's do that. But what's the podcast called?
The Healthy Rebellion.
Nice. Okay. All right. So folks, check that out. Even if it's not coming, I don't think people are people are so overwhelmed with content. It's okay if you have only 1 1/3 episodes a month at this point. But I think after this conversation, people might be interested in following you a bit more. So I'll put links up beneath this video, as well as at tomwoods.com/2580. What did I say this was? 2582. So thanks so much again, Robb. Great to reconnect.
Thank you.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Make yourself and those you love less vulnerable to the regime, both mentally and physically. Get more forbidden information at tomsfreebooks.com, and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. See you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.